The trial of Donald Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, has entered its sixth day. The star witness, Rick Gates, Manafort's one-time deputy, is on the stand, describing for the jury exactly how he and Manafort defrauded the government. Paul Manafort is on trial for bank fraud, tax evasion, and other crimes related to his dirty book of business, largely for pro-Russian clients. It's a trial that has brought to the surface Manafort's lavish spending and the inconvenient truth that he went to work for Donald Trump for free at a time that he was in debt and inextricably linked to Russian oligarchs. He worked for Mr. Trump at a time that the GOP policy platform at the Republican National Convention was changed for the very first time in history to advance policies supported by Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Manafort trial is playing on a loop in Donald Trump's White House, along with coverage of the continued fallout from the president's tweet Sunday, in which he appeared to throw his son, Donald Trump Jr., under the bus for meeting with, wait for it, Russians to get dirt on Hillary Clinton. These troubling storylines intersect for the president at a time that he finds himself under ever-increasing pressure to sit for an interview with special counsel Robert Mueller. The Washington Post reporting, quote, Rudolph Giuliani, President Trump's lead attorney for the ongoing special counsel investigation, said Monday that Trump's legal team is planning to send a letter to special counsel Robert Mueller this week. The letter will largely rebuff Mueller's latest offer of a presidential interview that would include questions about possible obstruction of justice. Here at the table for the hour, MSNBC contributors Steve Schmidt and Matt Miller. But first, to react for the very first time to the events weighing on this president, different threads, of a single story. Questions about Russians in contact with people in the president's inner circle. Former CIA Director John Brennan, lucky for us, now a senior national security and intelligence analyst for MSNBC and NBC News. I understand now, sitting here today, why Donald Trump, a week or so ago, said, don't believe what you see, don't believe what you hear on the news channels, because when you take all these events just this week together, they paint a very compromising position for this president on the question of Russian influence.
Well, I think that's right, Nicole. And I think we've seen over the course of the last 2 years, basically, an effort on the part of Mr. Trump and others to try to inoculate public perceptions of what actually happened during the campaign. First, there were no meetings. Then there were meetings, but they were focused on adoption. They were benign. Then they acknowledged that there were meetings and there were some issues that were discussed. But now we're at the point of them saying that, well, collusion is not against the law. So I think this just reflects just this steady slide of the Trump team to try to acknowledge that some things happened, but they weren't wrong, they weren't illegal. That's where it's up to the special counsel and his team to uncover exactly what happened, the motivations for those who went into those meetings, and to come to the conclusions that I think the evidence will bring forth.
Is there any question in your mind about what the motivations were for the people in the meetings? I mean, the Trump Tower meeting was attended by Natalia Veselnitskaya and others who were known to be close to the Kremlin. When you first heard about that meeting, was there any doubt in your mind about what the motives were for that meeting?
Well, I think anybody who would go into a meeting like that with individuals who were known to be associated with Russian intelligence should have realized that they were getting into some very, very deep and hot water. What has come out in the public reports over the last year and a half in terms of what the anticipation was, in terms of dirt on Hillary Clinton and people eagerly looking forward to that, I think there's no question, certainly in my mind, that they thought they were going to get something that was going to assist the campaign effort of Donald Trump.
Did the American intelligence community have real-time knowledge that agents of the Kremlin, like Natalia Veselnitskaya, were meeting with representatives of the Trump campaign, including the president's son and son-in-law and his campaign chairman?
Well, I think obviously, Nicole, I'm not going to tell you about what the intelligence and law enforcement capabilities were at that time and may still be in terms of being able to monitor these ongoing developments. But I must say the FBI and the U.S. intelligence community are the world's best in terms of being able to detect and to then uncover, sometimes in real time, but often you are able to determine exactly what happened by putting together some bits and pieces of data until you actually can see more of the puzzle.
I think I hear what you're saying, and unlike this president, I respect the need to protect sources and methods. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is one of Donald Trump's attacks on the intelligence community, where you spent the vast majority of your career, and on law enforcement, which is both sides of those. The CIA run by his handpicked appointees, and before that by a political supporter of his, Mike Pompeo. The FBI now run by his handpicked nominee, Christopher Wray. He attacks them constantly. Should he have been warned by the FBI that there were Russian agents in Trump Tower? I mean, with Trump, sometimes there's a kernel of something. Do you know if there was enough information in the possession of the U.S. government that in hindsight, maybe he should have been warned?
Well, certainly the campaign was given defensive briefings by the FBI about what they should be aware of and on the lookout for. But if there were ongoing investigations at the time, which Jim Comey and others have acknowledged that in late July those investigations were opened, it's very, very difficult to reveal details of an investigation while at the same time protecting the integrity of that investigation. So I know the Bureau tried to balance their need to warn and to advise the two campaigns about the potential for foreign interference, but at the same time continue to pull those investigative threads. And they continue to pull them throughout the course of the campaign and during the period between Election Day and Inauguration Day, and then subsequent to that. But the Bureau has to be able to protect source and methods and be able to ensure that their investigation is going to be able to continue.
And that was something that was cherished and held dear by every Democratic and Republican president until this president was sworn in January of the beginning of his first term. So I wonder if you take that the FBI has to be able to preserve an ongoing counterintelligence investigation, which that was. Now it's also a criminal investigation. I wonder if there's any regret or remorse that all of these norms, all of these law enforcement norms, all of these intelligence community norms were preserved and protected for a president who's trampled over them.
Well, I think both law enforcement and intelligence professionals take their responsibilities quite seriously. And they frequently will encounter issues that are rather unique. And this was a unique one, certainly in my experience. We never had, during an ongoing, hotly contested presidential campaign, this type of foreign activity, as well as the type of activity that was uncovered in terms of interactions between people affiliated with the campaign and these foreign actors. So it was a very, very difficult balance. I'm sure there are individuals who, looking back on it now, say maybe we should have done a little bit more of this or a little bit less of that. But trying to preserve their ability to understand the facts and not to, in any way, impugn individuals' reputations prematurely. I think these were some of the things that were of a concern to the FBI and others.
And I guess what I understand, I guess what I'm getting at is you were protecting the presumption of innocence of people who trample all over the integrity of the people who are protecting them. So it seems like now, looking back at however many months of the Trump administration, people were acting in a way that they thought would be reciprocated in terms of understanding the functions of the American intelligence community and law enforcement. I do want to get to the Manafort trial. Jeremy Bash on this program once said that it was possible that there was a Russian plant, that there was somebody who sought out employment on the Trump campaign. And we know that Paul Manafort was in debt to Russian oligarchs. We know that Paul Manafort sought out the president's close friend, Tom Barrack, and asked to get in front of Trump. We know that Paul Manafort went in at a difficult time for the campaign, served as its chairman at a time when the platform at the Republican National Convention, coincidentally, perhaps, maybe it's Donald Trump's one true intellectual impulse on foreign policy, which I don't think it's a coincidence it happens to be about Russia, changed to a pro-Russia position. What do you make of the fact that Paul Manafort, while I understand this trial is about financial crimes, is one of the first characters who could have been perhaps planted there or placed there as a Russian agent inside the Trump campaign? Is that implausible to you?
No, it's not implausible. I see so many dimensions of how the Russians take advantage of opportunities, so many elements of Russian tradecraft that could be present here. Identifying individuals who may have direct or indirect access to centers of power, either current or future. individuals who have different types of vulnerabilities, whether it is financial vulnerabilities or vulnerabilities as far as being prone to flattery and their ego needing to be polished. There are people who have foreign business connections that could be exploited, opportunities to dangle business opportunities in front of them. And a lot of times individuals who may have these weaknesses and these vulnerabilities will seize upon it. Sometimes they turn a blind eye to the potential that it could be, in fact, a ploy by a Russian intelligence element. But a lot of times people recognize that there are vulnerabilities here in themselves, but still will pursue this because they have tremendous financial pressures upon them. And I think what's coming out in this case is that Paul Manafort faced very, very serious financial problems and was seeking to capitalize on them. So I think the special counsel's team has done a good job, what I've seen so far publicly, in terms of uncovering some of this. And Rick Gates now is acknowledging his role in this. You know, when I see this continued case evolve, I keep thinking about sort of those who are affiliated with Mr. Trump. It's almost like a pack of cars going down a highway being pursued by law enforcement. Yeah. And some of those cars have been pulled over and have now cooperating with the authorities, the Mike Flynn's and George Papadopoulos's and Rick Gates. There are some of those cars that have been pulled over and are still resisting arrest, like Paul Manafort. And then there are the other cars that are still on that highway, driving recklessly, careening back and forth, bumping into guardrails. They're going to crash, they're going to go off a cliff, or they're going to be outmaneuvered by law enforcement. It's one of those. They're not going to get away.
Let me ask you about a white Bronco here to mix metaphors. Don Jr. largely thought to have been thrown under the bus by his father, who changed his own story. But they seem to have a strategy for avoiding maybe not even impeachment, but conviction in the Senate. So I guess the president isn't worried about himself. But he appeared to throw his son under the bus when he said, Don Jr. took a meeting with the Russians. It happens all the time. Steve Schmidt is here with me. We've worked on a lot of presidential campaigns. You never meet with a foreign government, let alone a foreign adversary. There are plenty of allies who have ideas and suggestions and information. You never take the meeting. You don't meet with the UK. You don't meet with the Israelis. You don't meet with our friends. You never, ever, ever correspond with American adversaries. So what do you think Trump's doing by saying, hey, Don Jr. met with Russians to get dirt on Hillary Clinton? Do you think it's sort of trying to signal the same kind of defense he's got for himself, collusion isn't a crime? Or do you think he really doesn't understand that his son could be in serious legal jeopardy for conspiracy?
I think it's both. I think he believes that he can convince his base and supporters that there was no crime here and trying to explain it away. But also, I think he has an exaggerated sense of his ability to navigate these legal shoals. And I think he has done a lot of damage to his legal defense and his son's legal defense. And I'm sure some of the lawyers that are trying to defend Mr. Trump and others, the real lawyers, not the Rudy Giuliani's, but the others, are rolling their eyes and are very concerned about all of the things that Mr. Trump continues to either tweet or to say that is complicating and making their jobs much more difficult.
Let me ask you something else about Russians, because they seem to be popping up everywhere, and it's always Russians. Maria Butina, who had infiltrated, a Russian spy, had infiltrated the NRA, which may seem a little off topic, but it's really not. This is about Russians manipulating the powers, the levers of power in Republican politics. Are you alarmed to see, are the Russians being emboldened, or are we getting better at catching them?
Well, it may be a little bit of both. Russian intelligence activities in the United States, I think, spans the spectrum from very sophisticated, exquisite intelligence operations that are really difficult to detect and uncover, to maybe some of the more entrepreneurial efforts on the part of those who may be working directly or indirectly with one of the Russian intelligence services, whose profile is maybe a little bit more prominent than a traditional Russian intelligence officer would like. And so therefore people like Butina, who have come across the radar. To me, it doesn't smack of very sophisticated Russian intelligence tradecraft. It is very aggressive and assertive, and she had a profile that I think was inconsistent with what a Russian intelligence officer would want of his or her asset or person working on their behalf in the United States.
I read Red Sparrow. I think I know what you're saying. Let me ask you one more question. You once now famously talked about witting and unwitting accomplices to the Russian effort to meddle in the 2016 election. In my mind, maybe erroneously, I put Don Jr. in the unwitting category. Do the events of the last week move him over to perhaps a witting accomplice to the Russian efforts? He responded, "I love it." His father now says he absolutely walked into a meeting with the Russians, people that we now know to have ties to the Kremlin, and sat there willingly wanting to receive dirt on Hillary Clinton. Would you now, in terms of his sort of legal standing and the role that he has played in all this, would you move him into the witting category?
Well, I think I would put him in the witting category in terms of knowing, going into that meeting with an anticipation and an expectation that he was going to get dirt from those individuals that were associated with Russia. Whether he was witting of just how bad that action was, I don't know. But if he had that position within the Trump campaign, he certainly should have been aware, and those who were working with him should have been aware, that going into that meeting in and of itself, just by definition, would be problematic. So I think it was a bit of naivete, a bit of overly self-confident, but also believing that he could get away with it and not be held to account one day. And I think he was certainly wrong on that score.
Yes, he hadn't met Mr. Mueller. John Brennan, thank you for your time. We're always grateful to have you. Great way to start. Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.